and along that stretch is a lot of entrances to different businesses, as opposed to being on the other side of the street, which has much more parking. I counted that they lost about 12 parking spots in this zone and wanting to put the bike path on that side. Don't really understand why. I think going back to one thing is that, that this is still a business center, even though that there's a lot more housing going down towards the North 40 and the apartments there. And I know part of the plan was, of course, to make it more safer for the pedestrians. There's a lot of people walking dogs from the kennels that come over there, so on and so forth. On the flip side is there is still, as Michael pointed out yesterday, the situation is not a leave with the parking. I mean, the businesses need parking. So they've chosen to put the no parking on the side of the street that I feel should be parking, because, like I say, there's a lot more lawn stretches without the entryways and so on and so forth. I totally support having parking only on one side of the street. We've got, the streets are almost 31 feet wide, I believe. I mean, they're quite wide now. And even with my neighbor who has Columbine storage, and they bring the big semis in there, plenty of room for them to come through if there's parking on one side of the street. So on one hand, I'm asking for them to reconsider in the 300 block about changing what side that the pedestrian bikeway is put in. On the 400 block, where they have taken away, there's zero parking pretty much on either side of the street. I can already see the consequences of what's going to happen. There's businesses there that are not only my own that are car intensive, but also people that bring in a lot of cars. For instance, King Yoga is a prime example. They have an overflow of parking. The people need to park there, and I'm sure that if they start being ticketed, you will be hearing from mainly the women that park out there. I don't understand why there is no parking on that one side of the street, but the consequences again that I'm already seeing is that down at the far end where I have parking there. And I've asked GR if you could put up some signs saying no unattended vehicles, because people are already starting to park there. They go into there now. If a semi comes in there, of course, Billy next door at Columbine will immediately assume they're my cars. And we, of course, move our cars when, the 2 or 3 times a week that the semis come in. Now we're getting people going into yoga and other places because of these no parking signs, and they have no place to park.
So our direction yesterday, I believe, was to bring it back in a couple of work sessions or a lengthy work session to exactly what the plan, the need, the adequateness of what we're doing out there. So I don't know, GR, if you can, I'm sure you have John's information and the people from King Yoga and various other businesses, and maybe we can do some public outreach to make sure that they come back and submit information about what their concerns are and that sort of stuff when we do have that as our work session is probably the direction to go in. But I think we heard a lot of it, where we were made aware of a lot of the concerns yesterday, and
yes,
now we're hearing exactly what they're referring to. So
right, and I of course I was here yesterday, and I feel that it's a great opportunity for things to be tweaked. Like I say, the whole improvement, they've done a great job, and it was updated. Nonetheless, the part we've taken away too many parking spaces, and like I say, when a car is parked there, there's still, as I measured the other day, 26-foot wide roadway.
If you could document a lot of this, and so that we can get it down in our work session. Mm-hmm. I mean, for public comment, I think we've heard a lot of the concerns, but it's hard for us to digest all of it unless they're documented out in bullet points. And then when we do look at maps and have our presenters and have the engineers department and business owners and people present their information all at once, So I don't want to totally cut you off here, but
No,
it's
that's
kind of
fine.
going around a little bit.
And I don't remember if you scheduled the work session.
We haven't scheduled it
Okay.
yet, so
So,
I would
so back
encourage
to
you
just-
to keep an eye on our agendas and GR, if you could potentially reach out to John when.
We've talked many times, and like I said, I think there's it's not a big deal other than they're putting up the signs down. There's a few tweaks that will make, I think, all the difference in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else here wanting to make public comment today? Please just
I was
come
here for
forward.
the same parking issues,
Yeah.
so should I just give my
Yeah,
statement?
unless you have something significant that you want to add, but I
No,
think
just-
really it's all going to happen in the work session.
That'd be perfect.
Perfect. Anybody else here with wanting to make public comment today? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and come to commissioners' comments. Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I would just like to let the public know that tomorrow, Thursday, April 10th, there will be a meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. in the Rio Grande Room, which is above Taster's restaurant down there and across from the Library Plaza, on the state water plan, also called the Colorado Water Plan, and the efforts that are ongoing with the Colorado River Basin 1177 Roundtable to develop a good plan. The state is looking to say, how do we use the rest of our water resources? The Front Range is very interested in increased diversions and Trans-Mountain diversions, or increasing their existing diversions with existing infrastructure. And the governor, by executive order, has charged each basin with developing their plan for their needs. And so it's quite a challenge. After each basin puts its plans together, we're going to see them kind of sewn together into one state plan. I think it's easy enough to acknowledge that the West Slope is not going to be looking for Trans-Mountain diversions from the east, but we do have to find ways within our own basin to secure our own future. There are some suggestions coming out of the Front Range that once the West Slope identifies its needs for growth and agriculture and non-consumptive needs through the year 2050, then all the rest of the water is on the table for the taking. And we really need to come together as a community in a valley to make sure that we are able to protect the environmental resources that are so important to all of us. So again, that's 6 to 8 p.m. on the 10th, Thursday the 10th, in the Rio Grande Room. And for those who have additional time to give, there are ongoing meetings in Glenwood Springs every 2 weeks at the Community Center. And the next one will be on the 14th of April. And that's where members of the public and people in related water industries, whether it's SAN or water providers, agriculturalists as well, are meeting in Glenwood Springs. And they include citizens from Grand County all the way through Mesa County. And so this is a big district, a big undertaking, and we need as much public input as possible. So hope to see you there. Thank you.
Other commissioners? George?
Segueing off of Rachel's comments in terms of protecting our environmental resources, next week the BLM will be hosting a series of open houses regarding the Thompson Divide area with the oil and gas leases up there. And there'll be public meetings starting on next Tuesday, April 15th in Glenwood at the Glenwood Spring Community Center from 4 to 7 p.m. Wednesday, April 16th, there'll be a meeting at the Carbondale Town Hall from 4 to 7 p.m. And then next Thursday, April 17th, they will be meeting here at the Pickens County Library from 3 to 6 p.m. So this is an opportunity for the public to weigh in and provide comments to the BLM, where they're just starting now their environmental analysis impact. And it's a scoping area that should have been done years ago. They acknowledge it wasn't done correctly. They also acknowledge that there's several illegal leases that were let on the Thompson Divide. So this is a way for them to do their due diligence and to hear public comments and concerns from the public in regards to any and all impacts that the continuation of oil and gas leasing may have on not only that particular area, but when we talk about clean water, it's part of the watershed. When we talk about clean air, when we look at economic sustainability for the grazers, the ranchers, the wildlife habitat, and any other numerous items. So I would encourage everyone to attend one of these meetings. If you cannot attend one of these meetings, you can go on the Thompson Divide website, just Google Thompson Divide, and there's an opportunity to sign on to a letter to voice your concerns or to share your concerns with the BLM. I think the Pickens County, along with some of our other neighboring municipalities, have done a tremendous amount of research and work in terms of developing arguments in terms of why these leases should be allowed to expire. So there's a lot of factual information out there. But on the other side of the coin, we need to hear from the public. There's a political will that will also help determine the course that the BLM will take. So I would encourage everyone to voice their opinion and or send their comments in to the BLM. You could do that via the Thompson Divide website.
Thank you. Other, Steve?
I've noticed that it is springtime outside and there are lots of bicycles around, and I've been out on my bicycle for the first time this year. And I would urge all bicyclists to be safe and ride carefully, wear helmets to protect your most precious part of your body, your head, and to have a good time this summer. It's great seeing people out there. And I did see our grassroots person getting on his bike yesterday too. Thank you.
Other commissioner comments? If none, I'll move to our consent actions. And we have one consent action, which is a resolution for citizen board appointments. There are a few new members and a plethora of rollover renewals that we are doing today. And I will go through and read the names of these people in the positions because they need to be honored a little bit. They do work hard on our volunteer citizen boards. So the applicants for board renewals are Rio Jacober for our Agriculture Building Review Committee, Marie Kelly for our Animal Shelter, Robert Throm for our Board of Adjustment, Robert Throm for our Senior Services Council, James Refkin for our Board of Adjustments, Rick Head for our Board of Adjustment, Robin Van Dullman, I apologize for butchering some of these names, Citizen Grant Review Committee, Michael Kinsley for Conflict Committee, Brooke Peterson for the Conflict Committee, Roger Nicholson for the Election Commission, Jonathan Feldman for the Election Commission, Lex Tamarans for the Financial Advisory Board, Steve Sundra for the Housing Authority, Marcia Goshorn for the Housing Authority, John Wilkinson for the Library Board, Barbara Reed for the Library Board, Howie Mallory for Open Space and Trails, District 2, Peter Martin for Redstone Historic Preservation, Jeffrey Scroy for Retirement Board, Buzz Dopkins for Senior Services Council, Peg McGavick, Senior Services Council, Christine Smith for Translator Advisory Board, Kevin Heineken for Translator Advisory Board, Patty Clapper for the Weed Advisory Board, and our new board members, some of which are returning, is Joseph Krabacher for the Planning and Zoning Board, and Michael Keys for the Housing Authority. Michelle Keys for the Housing Authority, which is our joint alternate with the city.
All right. I would make a motion to approve the resolution appointing the citizen board members and thanking them as well.
Second?
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Next, we move to our consent action. First reading set for public hearing on April 23rd. And the first is an ordinance transferring open space commercial use permit authority to the Open Space Department. And Dale Will, unfortunately, had a family emergency that he had to be detained for. So I hope everything's okay with him. Our blessings go out to him, and we'll bring up some of his staff. I don't know who. Gary's here to present this, and I know Cindy's going to present one as well. So. Gary Tannenbaum from our Open Space and Trails Department.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. This is a long time coming. This is one of those kind of management issues that we've been dealing with for, since the inception of kind of our stewardship program. And, right now, we have all these management plans in action, and there's a lot of commercial use occurring on open space lands, and they're not being managed the way that some of the management plans have guided. And so this is a way to bring it into the Open Space and Trails program. We've worked with community development really well over the years, but when they look at commercial use, it's usually on the county as a whole. And so when we're looking at commercial use, it's on every single property. And it's a way, we've proven with the rafting companies on the Roaring Fork Gorge many, many years ago that if we can work together with the rafting companies and get a permit system going with them, that the overall management of the property is better. But the hardest part is then we have to bring it through the whole community development program to do it, and then they'll look at something much larger than what we'll look at on our properties. And so for us, it's a much better deal if we can work with the community users, the commercial users on each property. We're talking about anglers on the Roaring Fork Gorge and along the Roaring Fork River, and we're talking about the rafters that we already have, trying to work with the stand-up paddleboard companies and everything else on the East Aspen area, trying to work with all of these groups to come to kind of some type of permit system to better manage our properties. And so this is something where we feel we can manage it really well on our properties, and we'll always work with community development to make sure the impacts beyond our properties are met too. But, we have a lot of, like when you approve the Roaring Fork Gorge Management Plan, one of the big action items was start to work with the commercial, we already have the rafters under a system. We don't have the anglers under the system, kind of getting them under the management so we don't have this plethora of trails that we have currently. We start working together to try to get some trails together, and then we rehab some of the other trails that go down the steep hill. So, this is kind of a better management tool that we think will work really well.
Rachel?
Well, when you say anglers, you're talking about commercial angling outfitters, or are you
Correct.
talking, so private citizens who are going fishing are not subject to this?
No,
Correct.
this is totally for just commercial use.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure we're very clear on that. And the other, as kind of looking through this, the one thing I'm wondering is how we could develop a little bit of a report back mechanism to the board after the contracts are signed. I'm not saying it needs to come to our board for approval or final ratification, but I think we should include some sort of report back mechanism so that there's a tally and a single document of who's been granted what under what conditions.
We can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
George?
Gary, are you or is the city working with the bike shops as they're renting out bikes to use on the Rio Grande Trail, for example, to just better, at least provide better information in terms of protocol, and as that trail, as we heard a few weeks ago from a presentation, it's very heavily used during peak times.
We've tried to work with a lot of the bike companies for years, and we do work with the city of Aspen on that. And so it's in the city of Aspen, so it wouldn't be subject to this commercial use permit, but, that's something that we need to continue to work on because, and I think we've done a pretty good job of working with them to try to get them to explain kind of announcing while passing and safe speeds and stuff like that, but I think that's going to be just something that we have to work on every year all the time to make sure that message gets passed on.
Other questions? Steve?
Gary, is there, since this is a little different system where the public or outfitters would interact with you, is there a way to, the best way to contact you before they would have gone to community development? But would they just call you, or are you going to contact all the outfitters, or how is that going to work?
We're going to try to, we're going to do a lot of public outreach, especially when we start doing a program for like the Roaring Fork Gorge with the angling, commercial anglers. We're going to do a lot of outreach. We're going to try to outreach to every single angler because, before, we're not going to just send them through a system. We want to create a system that works not only for us, but also works for the commercial outfitters. They've been on those properties for years. And so, working together with these organizations will be key. So yeah, we're going to reach out to as many as we can. And, over time, we're not looking, like if you didn't get through this first period, you're not going to get fined and all that. We're going to bring you into the system and try to get everyone to, so we understand where people are parking, so we understand where people are going and stuff like that. So yeah, we're going to do a lot of outreach over this summer to try to get the first wave in, and then as we learn more and more, we'll get. But they, feel free that, if you do watch this or hear about this, that you can contact the Open Space Department through our website, and if you contact one of us, we'll get it to the right person.
And one other thing on, just a formatting thing on the final page of our document, it has A, B, C, and D, and at least on the copy I have here, and it's not formatted right, and if you want to, maybe yours already got corrected. The very last page there.
Okay, A,
Yeah.
B, C, D.
And it seemed like B, C, and D are bullet points under A.
Oh, I think it might have gotten.
But maybe maybe it's already been changed in the computer, but I just,
Okay, well,
I just
we'll make
wanted
sure.
to point that out.
Sure. No, it seems like it's right on mine, but on the final one, I'll make sure that it's right.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
You ready? I'll make a motion.
I have one more question. I just want to clarify for other people how this relates to special events, because you didn't really go into that, and that's an important aspect. So can you talk a little bit how this relates to special events?
Sure. We wanted to keep this separate from special events. These are commercial events that happen, multiple times over a summer and continuous use over a summer or the winter or whatever, where a special event is usually a one-time or a couple-time activity. And the special events is not subject to this. We are still working with community development under the existing land use code section for special events.
I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion to accept the ordinance transferring open space commercial use permit authority to the Open Space Department.
Second?
And just
Yep,
technically, does it
discussion.
need to be approve or accept? Yeah, I think it's,
I'll make a motion to accept.
you said accept, I think it's approved. is what
I'll
you
make a
mean.
motion to approve.
There we go.
I'll
There we
second
go.
that also.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we're on the, all right.
We have a first and a second. We had a little discussion. Any more discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes. Thank you. Cindy is going to present on the authorization for the Open Space Master Plan Authority.
Yeah, great.
Cindy Hubin.
Thank you. Cindy Hubin, Community Development Department. And Dale and I have been working together for quite some time on this concept of the Open Space Master Plan. Back in 2000, we had a regulation for the open space master plan that actually was quite fruitful in preservation of open space in the county, and lessening development from its zoned potential. We had that ordinance in place for, I think, 3 years, and then it sunsetted. At that time, there was not a lot of demand for this type of program, but now we're seeing that potentially that demand is there. So we'd like to take a look at reenacting the open space master plan in a new form with some significant changes. The most significant change to this first reading of this ordinance, I might point out today, is that we are looking at 70-acre parcels versus 160-acre parcels throughout the county, and that transferable development rights would not be a part of the equation any longer. Just to back up for a second and talk a little bit about how the program worked, what Dale's operation could bring to the table, obviously, was open space funding, and what community development could bring to the table, most significantly probably, was a look at vested rights for more of a long term than we typically have in the county, as well as a shortened review process. The process is such that it's got a lot of checks and balances. As community development director, I or my staff would be in charge of review and ensuring that all the things in the land use code are still adhered to under a shortened process. The Open Space and Trails Board would have to look at the project and determine that it was in fact a project that met their standards. And also, you, as the Board of County Commissioners, would have the final authority as to whether or not you'd want to approve such a project. These projects would only be brought forward by staff, not by private applicants. And I think the major point that was in discussions when we talked about this in work session with you as the Board of County Commissioners, with the Open Space and Trails Board, and with our Planning and Zoning Commission, was the use of transferable development rights, and that's off the table. However, we felt that there was something we might want to look at as far as allowing larger square footages than the 5750. If we looked at parcels up valley from Brush Creek, there's a map on the back of the ordinance that that shows that designation. And then also, we took a look, you asked us to take a look at how many parcels would be involved, 70-acre parcels up valley of Brush Creek. There are technically 21 parcels up valley of Castle Creek that might be in this category, although when you take a deeper look at what properties already have preservation qualities or already are subdivided and only are the open space parcels associated with those properties, we're really only looking at maybe 6 or 7 properties that would really qualify for an increase of square footage over 5750 in the upper valley. And I think that covers it. It's the first reading, so if you had any thoughts or changes, we could definitely take a look at that and come back.
Questions?
I have a question, Cindy. So we're taking away the eligibility to utilize TDRs, but right now, if anybody wants to go above 5750, they would need to utilize a TDR. So in this case, we're just
Actually, you really, we could make that adjustment in the planning process and bring it to you as such.
for anywhere in the county? Or?
No, we're only talking about Brush Creek up,
Yeah.
and we're only talking potentially maybe, 6 or 7 properties at the most that would even qualify under what the conditions would be. And more specifically, George, on the 3rd page of the attached ordinance, we were very specific in the concerns that we heard about going above the 5750, and that exception would only be allowed if it qualified under the standards on that page. That obviously nobody in rural and remote could use this process, and then also there would have to be a finding that There would be no significant visual impacts created from the public roads, public trails, or nearby public lands. There would not significantly, this increase in square footage would not significantly degrade surrounding rural character. And thirdly, it would not create significant light, air, water, or traffic impacts.
So maybe I missed it, but is there a top limitation in terms of?
Yes, it would only be what would be allowed by the property. You know, and all properties in Pitkin County that are larger properties are typically in the larger zone districts, AFR 10 and above, 20s and 30 acre zone districts. And those properties technically are allowed to go up to the 15,000 square feet in Pitkin County through the use of transferable development rights.
So again, just so I'm clear, so in this case, there may be some properties that would be eligible to go above the 5750 based on certain criteria, but to get to that point, it would not
Necessarily require that.
it wouldn't require the use of TDRs.
Oftentimes, properties have their own not rights, but could potentially create TDRs off of the property that might just be used on site. That's one way that might be used.
Okay.
Rachel?
I've gotten more confused as you
Okay.
talk, Cindy.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Just following up on what Georgia said, they would have a 5750 by right.
Right.
But this allows them to go to an increased maximum allowable floor area.
Correct.
But they would not would part of the development approval give them that square footage without a TDR, or will they need to get a TDR either by buying it from the market or creating it off their own land?
Either or.
Okay.
Oftentimes the properties are large enough above the 70 acres that they already have what we would consider rights that could be used on site, or we could buy transferable development rights to be used on site on those properties.
Okay. I guess a couple of things. One is that I would like to have some hypothetical examples of how this would play out in writing at the next meeting. You know, so it's not parcel specific or to any property, but I really would like to kind of see the sequence of how you see this playing out. Because at first blush, it sounds a little bit like it's greatly reducing the demand for TDRs. You know, again, at first blush, that is someone that may be generated by these properties that in the past have said, I want another 2,000 square feet, I'll buy a TDR. And now it's going to be, they're somehow conserving or putting a conservation easement over their property and not subdividing it. And I'm just still curious, you know, because we know state subdivision is at 35 acres. So they would be eliminating growth on one potential state subdivision site of 35 and keeping 35. I just need to see how you see this playing out.
I can bring examples.
Okay. And to make sure, again, that it doesn't crimp the demand market to use up the TDRs that will still be sent. And the other question I have is just, this seems so very much tailored towards above Brush Creek. Well, are we eliminating the ability to use this tool below Brush Creek for properties that are over 160 acres and these larger ones?
Yes, you
And-
can still use, I'm sorry.
But I mean, I'm just, because a lot of the remaining larger ranches and properties that we may want to see conservation on are below Brush Creek, and it seems like now we're taking away a tool that we had to work with them towards a open space conservation development master plan of larger ranches.
If I could clarify real quickly,
Okay.
this applies to the entire county.
Yes.
It used to apply to only 160 acre parcels and larger.
Right.
Now it will apply to 70 acre parcels and larger throughout the county.
Okay.
However, just above Brush Creek, and those properties throughout the county, with the exception of the properties above Brush Creek, would only be limited to the 5,750 square feet per home.
Okay.
The argument was that if in fact we were using Open Space and Trails funding, the Open Space and Trails Board did not want to encourage the larger homes on these conservation sites.
Okay.
as part of the conservation package. The compromise, if you will, was that many of the sites above Brush Creek may already be surrounded by larger homes, and it didn't make a lot of sense not to allow a larger square footage in a neighborhood where a larger square footage was already accepted. And so that's the distinction.
Okay. I just have a couple more questions, if it's okay. One is that I'm just not so sure that using Brush Creek is a good defining line for me in terms of, well, what about when you get over to the Woody Creek side or the other side of Highway 82? Where do you say, is it Brush Creek Road turnoff and it cuts Woody Creek in half? So maybe it's just the summary language that we have that makes it less clear, but the summary language is a little confusing to me, and that also relates back to this reduce eligibility acreage to 70 acres. That sounds like only 70-acre parcels will be considered for this program.
But in fact, it's an opening the
Right,
door
it's
to
opening
more
the door.
parcels.
Okay, because it just sounds funny in how it's written.
Yeah, it says reduce it to.
It makes it sound like you can't apply if you had 80 acres.
Right, but that's not the case. Now, anyone can would qualify from 70 acres and
So
above.
it increases eligibility.
It does.
To parcels that are below 160 to 70 now.
Exactly.
So, okay, thank you very much.
Steve?
I'd agree with Rachel. I got more confused also, but you are eliminating two different things from the toolbox on things for down valley. One would be the house size, and I could see, like in Snowmass Capitol Creek area, a house size of 8250 square feet is allowed under exceptional circumstances. And there could be ranch land where an 8250 house could be totally appropriate, where the owner would want to do a conservation easement. But they would they'd be willing to give up other development rights in return for being allowed to build one 8250 house. And it could be an exceptional circumstance where it could be sited in a place that it doesn't affect anybody else. And so to me, that's taking a potential tool out of the toolbox that might make the difference between a landowner saying, well, forget it, I'm not going to do a conservation easement because it eliminates the possibility of
Going to 8250.
having the 8250 house.
We
The
initially-
other one is, you're eliminating the TDRs as a possible thing. Cindy, you were the one who came up with that idea originally on our property when it first started. And here it says it reflects a trend to emphasize other tools, but wouldn't the use of TDR still be potentially a tool that could be used in, a big ranch in a down valley location?
Quite frankly, we proposed that in our work sessions with our first draft to continue to use the TDR program as part of this program. But after it was vetted through the Planning and Zoning Commission and Open Space and Trails Board, and I think there was kind of a split in the discussion amongst you as the board, that was eliminated except for the Upper Valley portion. And it was just because I think most strongly the Open Space and Trails Board wanted the Open Space and Trails funded conservation easement properties to be associated with smaller homes that were more rural in character. And I think that's a fair statement. And so it was definitely a compromise to eliminate that from the Down Valley area.
Okay, and then just one other question for clarification. On the map on the back, it has open space master plan area map. And you have a separate Snowmass Canyon master plan thing mapped out, distinct from Woody Creek, Emma Basalt, and Snowmass Capitol Creek area. And yet, when the Snowmass Canyon, when we're looking at the greenhouse down there, that was in the Woody Creek master plan area, was our understanding. And also, I always thought the Snowmass Capitol Creek boundary went like up to the top of Williams Hill, which is BLM and state land, sort of to the top of Watson Divide. Then the other side would go down into the Woody Creek area. But this map doesn't jibe with what my understanding of what boundaries were. And if we could get a clarification sometime on that.
Definitely, I'll bring back another map on the second reading, or because I didn't generate this one, I'm not really sure what underlying maps were used. We'll take a look at that.
Additional questions? Rachel?
Just so I understand, Cindy, there are the primary changes to the revised code section as listed in the summary, but the other items above have not necessarily all been eliminated. They, the one-stop program combining home site approvals and open space funding, a lot of those components remain.
Right.
Okay, and you outline what removes. If a property owner, and this must be county initiated. Okay, but so what other avenues would a homeowner have or property owner have if they wanted to conserve their property, but as Steve has said, don't want to reduce the amount of home size that's already allowed by their caucus area? Do they have other avenues to talk to Open Space and Trails Board, or do they have to reduce their home site in order to even, for you guys to consider the parcel?
There are definitely other avenues through Open Space and Trails as well as community development. We have a number of conservation development subdivisions, and then I would let Gary talk about it, but I think that there's, outright purchase of trail easements and the types of things that Open Space might have in their charter.
Well, again, perhaps detail a few of those or bullet point a few of those for the second reading, because it kind of makes it a little bit sound like all conservation is going to be funneled through this mechanism. And I can see expanding it, certainly, but it was originally generated over the idea of very large parcels.
Further questions?
Do you accept a motion?
Yeah.
I would move to approve an ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Colorado, authorizing the Open Space Master Plan Authority.
Second?
So first and second, any discussion? This is set for public hearing on April 22nd, second reading.
Or 23rd.
I'm sorry, 23rd, yes. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Next on our agenda, we've got a resolution for approving the Aspen-Pickens County Airport Design Guidelines. And Jim, glad to see you're here. And Tim Malloy is here as well. Jim Elwood from our airport.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. What's in front of you is the first reading of the design guidelines, and I thought it might be worthwhile just to take a few moments and go back, if not for all of you, certainly for the television audience as well. Back when we did the airport's master plan, which was approved by the Board of County Commissioners in 2012, one of the key points that was important to the board, as well as some others, is that we went into a process to create these design guidelines. And to do that, to make sure that we really did try to capture the community's values, their concerns, their thoughts about how and what changes might occur at the airport in the future. So while the airport master plan really focused very well on how the airport might lay out, there was a gap in there that the board accurately pointed out, and it was that we didn't necessarily talk about how that would feel and what would be the characteristics that would be part of any changes that might occur at the airport in the future. And I think a lot of that came out of discussions from new commercial terminal discussion, as well as what might happen in regards to a second FBO or west side changes on the Owl Creek side of the airport. So all of you put together a group of individuals, community members, with a pretty diverse background from architecture, planning, and nearby home owners and representatives to work on this project. And as you know, we had several joint meetings with you in that committee, as well as that committee working independently to come forward with these design guidelines. I believe they do a really good job of kind of trying to capture that uniqueness that is our community and those values as we might move forward at the airport. We've received quite a bit of input in the process. Those are all reflected in the document that you have in front of you today. I think Tim Malloy can point out those particular changes since you last saw this document. But it's a substantial document, I can tell you, at least by pound weight. It is much greater than most airports of our size would ever think of having. But I think it's important to make sure that we understand the process and to capture the unique feel that our community expects of its airport. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Malloy. Tim was our lead on this from a consultant standpoint, and he's with T.G. Malloy out of Glenwood Springs, longtime resident of the Valley and planning area. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Jim. So I think this is the third or fourth time the board has seen either a portion or this document in total. And the last time that you saw it was February the 25th, where we were discussing, in particular, the Section 5, which is the section from our January meeting, of which you were most interested in making sure was accurate, clear, easy to understand, and had a process that flowed and was easy for the airport to manage. We made those changes after the January meeting and presented those on the 25th of February. And at that meeting, you really didn't have many desired changes. And prior to that, during the January meeting, there were only a few changes that you had requested. So the document in front of you incorporates all the changes that you have requested, as well as changes that occurred in a task force meeting of February the 11th, and staff comments, airport staff comments that were incorporated on March the 31st. Most of the changes that were done since you last saw this on February the 25th are relatively minor formatting changes to improve readability. An example of that would be on pages 22 and 23, where we have, we've increased the page number size, we've used bold more often, increased the spacing, we've adjusted, changed, added some images that we thought were better reflected what was the purpose of the particular guideline to which they were related. A couple of significant changes to the document occur, one on page 29, and this is one that flowed from the January board's review of the document in January, where it was requested that we include a definition of American modernism, which is shown in the gray box in the lower right-hand corner on that page. And on page 42...
I think we've got different pages in our...
Yeah, they're looking at the
online.
page on the...
Our pages online do not correlate with your pages on the paper.
Really, it's the same document.
Add four to it.
33,
Add 4.
page 33.
Okay.
Because we've got the
because the
memo
agenda
as
item.
part of it, as part of the same PDF.
Oh,
My
okay.
apologies. Yeah.
He's talking PDF page, you're talking
Yes.
document page.
Yes, correct.
Just add 4.
So on 42, for example, item number 2.4A1, I think it was Steve who requested that we make sure that the airport goes above and beyond with respect to ADA when we're looking at design, especially of the terminal. And so we added that language there. And then, of course, there's the addition of the glossary of terms in the appendix. And there are a number of other minor tweaks and adjustments, but nothing that I think we need to take your time to review at this point, unless you have any specific questions that you want me to address, in which case we can certainly discuss anything that you like.
Commissioners? Steve?
I have a list of things, and I actually went over this with John Peacock earlier today. So I have two questions that are specific. On page 52, it refers to tie-back slopes.
Right.
And I wonder what a tie-back slope is.
That is when you're doing grading, it is the point at which you're tying back to the existing grade. So it's the slope required to achieve that, depending on what it is you're working with.
So it's a transition?
Correct.
So like a transition. Okay. On page 83, it's talking about L&E review.
Correct.
And it says that the applicable county master plan is the sole review criteria. And it seems to me that there would be other review criteria, but I was curious about why the word sole is in there.
Because that's the accurate word. It is the sole review.
Is that the word? Is that
State statutes authorize the county, in the case of location and expense review, to review projects that are administered, managed, or considered public projects for compliance with the applicable master plan.
okay? And then the applicable county master plan would refer to underlying zoning and all the and other things.
No.
Presumably, or
It would refer to now the west of Maroon Creek plan, which was adopted last fall, I believe. And that would be the document that we'd be reviewing, in addition, of course, to the airport's own master plan.
yeah. Okay. I was just curious about that.
That, by the way, Steve, is one of the reasons that we did this, is because location and extent review didn't provide the board with a sort of comfortable level of sort of scrutiny of the kinds of projects that the airport would be doing. So we wanted to add this level of review to augment what you can do through the location and extents process.
Okay. And then I had just a couple of points that would be, discussion points for the board. One on page 39, the second paragraph, it's talking about and I'll give you my copy so you don't have to write everything down if you don't want to. It talks about about certification, like lead certification, or what a developer would not be required to achieve those levels of certification. But then on page 73, there's a paragraph describing if appropriate, based on their use, new buildings and major renovations of existing buildings should incorporate measures to reduce energy consumption, other building technologies, etc., or equivalent. So they don't have to achieve the LEED. They don't have to get the LEED certification, but they were kind of requesting that they achieve the same level of building standards.
Correct.
And so those are almost, kind of contradictory between those two paragraphs.
They weren't intended to be contradictory. They were actually intending to be complementary, because as the group went through the issues, there may be circumstances where a LEED status doesn't necessarily directly apply, or more likely is that the group didn't want to limit creativity to achieve a standard that would be more applicable to the moment and the building or structure. So they wanted to focus the intent to have it be the highest possible energy conservation, but not limit the ideas about how you might actually get there, and allow creativity to still be part of the evaluation process.
And in fact, if you look at the language on page 39, it says the decision as to whether to pursue LEED certification through the U.S. Green Building Council or other design and construction certificates such as net zero is left up to individual project developers. So we're encouraging them to do that, but we're not requiring them to meet the LEED standards. And of course, in most cases, it's going to be you.
Yeah.
Since this is, a public property. And then the language on page 73 says, to achieve LEED Gold certification or equivalent at minimum. I think those actually are compatible in as much as one is saying, do something similar to this, but you don't have to necessarily pursue the certification, of course, which there's a cost associated with as well.
There's one addition, if I might, Rob, is that the county building code already has very high energy-based standards. So that's the backstop against all of this. I will share with you, I had a chance to tour the Leeds Platinum Building, Net Energy Zero Building at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden not too long ago. And they actually had to get a modification from their building code to be able to do the Net Energy Zero. And so, because they needed to be able to use a wall that would have normally required an R value of X, they wanted to use it for cycling air both during the summer in one direction to help heat the building and in the opposite direction in the summertime. So there are moments that may not always be perfect for the right answer for that structure, that moment, that technology.
Rachel?
Yeah, just on this point, and not to interrupt your other questions, but it's similar to when we just toured the city's Burlingame affordable housing units, where they built them to LEED standards, but they did not pursue the LEED certification because the evaluation and the certification cost an additional $500,000.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we see a lot of people moving in that direction. But I think maybe the LEED certification has to, wake up to market realities. Is I'd rather invest that same $400,000, $500,000 in more energy efficiency than in having somebody certify it, for their, record keeping.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable with this language.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the buildings that are built are,
Yes.
I mean, I agree with you, don't spend the money for LEED certification, spend it on making the buildings to that level of construction and energy efficiency and whatever.
Exactly.
Okay, just a couple more points. On page 48, talks about the parking facility. It all has to do with parking cars. And I couldn't find anywhere where it mentioned parking bicycles, except on page 73, there's a picture of WeCycle parking in a totally unrelated part of the document. And I think if that picture were just moved to from page 73 to page 48, showing the bicycle parking, I think part of what's driving my point is at some point in the future somebody besides all of us will be reading the document, and I just want to make sure that they, if they see a picture of bicycle parking there, then they'll relate it to parking. So that might be all. If that picture were just moved over there, it's kind of implying, bicycle parking is part of parking, and we need to consider it when designing something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and perhaps we can use another picture or something in that area. What page was that again?
It was on page 73 is the WeCycle bicycle parking picture. In an area that's talking about sound, noise, pollution kind of.
So the section on page 48 is really referring to not the parking, but the facility. So maybe it's how we define parking facility, and where you're referring to is really talking about noise and air quality and alternate transportations is the other section. So I'm not so sure that they are the same section, because we're talking about vehicular, maybe the word vehicle parking facilities should be put into page 48.
Yeah, I would just like it expanded to mention bicycle parking is one aspect of parking that should be considered.
I can support that. It's a simple footnote under parking.
Just a one sentence thing, another bullet point.
Yeah.
Actually, if you don't mind, the section that this is in that includes page 48, and that piece is specifically related to parking facilities, is part of a long section that has to do with, starting on page 42, that has to do with customer service and experience. And I would point out that at the bottom, or really section D on page 44, talks about enhancing the pedestrian experience, walking within the airport, And number 6 says cycling to and from the airport is encouraged and clearly marked bicycle lanes should be provided along streets to accommodate safe bicycle travel. Cycling on pedestrian paths should be discouraged. And although I can't come up with it right now in my mind, I know there is a reference here also to expanding bicycle parking.
The parking.
So-
But if it's not included, that might, right on that item 6 on page 44, might be the place to just
Yeah.
mention, say bicycle parking should be provided, or
Okay.
Other comments?
I had a couple more, Rob.
Yep.
Let's see, on page 56, it's talking about the landscaping, page 56, 57, and irrigation. And there's no mention whatsoever of xeriscaping, and since Rachel and I have been spending a lot of time on the Colorado Water Plan, and water's forefront on our minds right now, and it seems like would be an opportunity to mention that xeriscaping should be considered where appropriate in the landscaping, just as a method of saving water. And I think I would put it on, it could be in the landscaping part, or it could be on the irrigation part on page 57. It mentions adding irrigation. And I think if xeriscaping were just mentioned as a possible landscaping tool that could be used, and certainly it wouldn't be used in all circumstances, but there could be parts of the airport where it would be the most appropriate kind of thing, and we could save a lot of water in the process.
Yeah, and really, it's totally consistent with the whole intent. If you look at the introductory paragraph on page 51, it says, these guidelines also further the concepts and intent of the existing airport landscape master plan, with the exception that the airport plans to move toward a more natural or native landscape appearance in the passenger terminal area, et cetera, which is really a similar
And the native landscape lives according to what falls out of the sky. It's more a it's kind of a xeriscape thing in a sense.
Yeah.
It's feast or famine in terms of water, but they're adapted to that. And if we did the native landscaping, we shouldn't necessarily have to irrigate it at all.
Okay, I'll make note that in that section on page 57, we should add a reference there.
Okay, and a couple little typo things that I noted on there that could be, just to make the document a little more 100% accurate. By and large, I have these couple points, but by and large, the document is awesome, and I really enjoyed looking through it all.
Thank you.
Other comments from commissioners? I'll make a couple comments at this point. One, I think it reads so much better, breaking up some of those paragraphs that kind of read on, and the formatting was a big part of it, as well as I kind of had a fun time using the pictures and what they referred to, and saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and this is what you mean by an entranceway, this is what you mean by this type of lighting, this is what you mean by various things. So I thought that was very helpful. Two tiny little things after he had a bunch of little things too that he just added. I'm not so sure that's the best photograph to have this document be presented to with people. Kind of looks like the parking lot part of our airport, not any glory part of our airport. I know that's a tiny little thing, but that's the first thing people see. And then this is a little one on page 3, ITTNER, not ITNER.
Oh, my apologies.
That is one that Steve thought.
I had one of the pictures of the airplane view of the airport from coming down over Shale Bluffs might be a good picture for the front page, because that's an awesome picture when you see the whole thing right there.
But very good work adding our comments and the additional work that was done from our last work session. Rachel?
Yeah, I agree, and others have made good comments. I agree with what Steve has brought forward, and I think you get to the end and there's these small catches, but they can be really good ones, and so I appreciate that. I just wanted to take the moment to thank all the citizen volunteers who helped on this and who've met with us repeatedly on this, and it's a very good document, and I believe it's a strong foundation on which to move forward with issues such as a new terminal and adequate service for our customers. Thank you.
They were a great group to work with.
Indeed.
Is there a motion?
A motion to, I'll accept a motion for this on first reading, set for public hearing on April 23rd, with some changes that are going to come back from some of the comments that were made.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, good work.
Thanks, guys.
And we have pulled item number 5, so we move on to item number 6, a resolution improving a intergovernmental agreement with Aspen Highlands Commercial Metropolitan District for rehabilitation of Thunderball Road at Maroon Creek Road and Prospector Road at Maroon Creek Road, which we talked about yesterday a little bit. Thank you, Rob. GR. State your name and position for the record and present away.
I'm GR Fielding, the county engineer. This item is going to allow the county to partner with the Aspen Highlands Commercial Metropolitan District on the rehabilitation of 2 intersections that are constructed out of concrete at the base of Aspen Highlands. These 2 intersections are a bit overdue for some work, and staff really looks forward to being able to start this project here very soon. The ownership of Maroon Creek Road is solely the county's. Where that intersects with Thunderbolt and Prospector, those are roads that are owned by the Metro District there. It also coincides with the county and city boundary in that neighborhood as well. The county will be responsible for management of the project, ensuring that all of the specifications and plans are adhered to. We will work in partnership with staff from the Metropolitan District in enforcing that. We'll have joint inspection. All of the contract is executed through the county. This will be the vehicle for them to reimburse the county. Our split is about $284,000 to $116,000 for the project.
My first question was just a kind of a legal thing, is that the resolution is kind of incomplete. It says fill text here for the therefores, which I'm assuming should say something like gives permission of the
Yes.
chair to execute this contract.
So we're looking at the now therefore clause.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll make the correction for the second.
George?
GR, when we approved a project up by Highlands, I forget the name of those condominiums a while back when they did some work on the road, we made sure that during that process that they would keep a clear path because this is sort of prime time for bicyclists who are going to be going up and down this area. So we made plans in terms of the construction management to try to keep a path clear and clean either before or after the construction.
So we have, whenever we do an intersection project, it's extremely complicated as far as the method that you handle the traffic. And we are going to implement a lighted, a temporary traffic signal in this area to have one lane that'll be open as allowed by that traffic light. What we have looked at is we're keeping the current template through there, which is fairly wide, which is nice, going past Highlands to facilitate the bicycle traffic. During the time of construction, we need to keep the one lane open no matter what. So that's how we've moved forward with that so far, George.
So, but will it be kept clean either before or after the construction has happened, so we don't get a lot of bicyclists running into problems navigating through the construction area? Even though there's one lane open, it doesn't mean it's going to be clear of debris.
They're going to be required to keep travel lane in good traveling condition for both bicyclists and vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I'll accept a motion. And I'm assuming the resolution should read, gives permission to
enter into
execute.
it, yeah, the internet,
Gives the chair permission to enter into this agreement.
correct.
I'd move to approve a resolution approving the IGA with Aspen Highlands Commercial Metropolitan District for rehabilitation of Thunderbolt Road at Maroon Creek Road and Prospector Road at Maroon Creek Road.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now on to our consent public hearing, second reading, and we have one item, a resolution approving a memorandum of understanding with Garfield County for permanency for children's services. And Kim's here to produce.
Good afternoon. So our goal was just to see if there were any further questions and if we could take action on this on second reading and have a public hearing to see if this would be approved by the Board of County Commissioners.
Any further questions? I will, at this point, open the public hearing. Anybody wishing to speak on this item may do so at this time. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board.
Okay. I would make a motion to approve the resolution approving the memorandum of understanding with Garfield County for permanency for children's services.
Second. First and second, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
I would propose that we take a 15-minute break to come back and tackle the last two cellular items.
Well, no, there's the ambulance.
There's the ambulance
Oh.
district one, if you want to tackle that.
I'm sorry, I skipped it with my eyes with that.
I would move to convene as the board of the Aspen Ambulance District.
Second?
We have a first and a second to convene as the Aspen Ambulance District. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are now convening as the Aspen Ambulance District, and we have an emergency resolution. This is a confirmatory reading of an emergency resolution between the Aspen Ambulance District and the Aspen Fire Protection District to utilize the facilities out at the AABC because the hospital is going through a renovation and we have to move our ambulances there for some time. And we went through this on first reading in some detail.
That's correct, Rob, and I am hoping this is confirmed because since the first reading, when the emergency resolution became effective, the ambulance district has effectively been cut off from its existing facility and is operating out of the North 40 facility through the Aspen Fire Protection District. The lease agreement is made between the ambulance district and the North 40 Fire Protection District. It has a term of 7 months. During that time, the ambulance district has agreed to pay 50% of the utilities and maintenance costs at the facility, as well as provide a $2,000 a month facility use fee. The hospital is actually covering all the incremental cost increases associated with renting, essentially renting this facility space from the Aspen Fire Protection District as part of their project costs.
Any additional questions? This is a public hearing at this point. I'm sorry, I didn't wait to hear. Nobody seemed to be raising their hand. This is a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing for this item at this time. Anybody wishing to speak on this item may do so at this time. Seeing none, I will bring it back to the board, back to the ambulance, the Aspen Ambulance,
District.
the board of the Aspen Ambulance District.
I would make a motion to approve on confirmatory reading and public hearing, the emergency resolution approving lease agreement between the Aspen Ambulance District and the Aspen Fire Protection District.
Second?
We have a first and a second. All those, any discussion?
Yeah, I'd just like to note that in a lot of communities, you don't necessarily see your fire district and your ambulance district and sheriff's office and everything working together so well. And we really do work together here, and it saves the taxpayers money, it provides for better public safety. So I really want to thank the fire district for their assistance in this.
Great. I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I will take a motion to adjourn as the Board of Aspen Ambulance District.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we are continuing our regular meeting after a 13-minute break. Come back at 1:45, just a little stretch break and bathroom break.
And you'll have to reconvene as the BOCC.
Commissioners' regular meeting on April 9th, 2014. We just left our meeting shortly to convene as the board of the Aspen Ambulance District, so now I'll take a motion to reconvene as the Board of County Commissioners.
So moved.
Second?
We have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are in our land use public hearings section of our agenda, and before us is a new cellular wireless AT&T wireless, singular wireless AT&T wireless special review for a cellular facility, and Mike Kramer is presenting this on the staff side.
Yeah, thank you. Mike Kramer with Pickens County Planning Staff. And we have a special review for an expansion of a cellular telephone facility. And the subject property is owned by the Ives, and it's located at 2147 Lower River Road. And next to me is Tom Alexander, and he's a consultant for AT&T, and he submitted this application and is representing the submittal. And just for context here, you have a map on page 1 of the memo, but I also printed off a map just behind you, Rob, there. And I'll give some context. Obviously outlined here in the orange is the Ives property. This is located along Lower River Road, and this is the Roaring Fork River. And what got cut off on the map then is Highway 82 right here. It's in the Woody Creek Caucus area, and it's a special review for a cell tower, and what that means is that's a one-step submission to the Board of County Commissioners. So this is a one-step public hearing. And on the property, we have the existing residence and a couple outbuildings over here. This was constructed sometime in the 1970s. And then we have the existing cell facility that's outlined in this red box right here. And what's out there right now are 2 cell towers. And there's a picture on page 2 of the staff memo. One is a 25-foot brown tower that was built in 2000. And that one was constructed by T-Mobile, and that got approval in 2000 and then got a subsequent approval in 2006 that basically gave an approval indefinitely for cell towers. And the context behind that is that at one time in the early 2000s when cell phones got more and more popular, there were certain approvals that approved special reviews for these towers for a certain time period, and most of those were between 5 and 10 years. So when those permits got expired, companies would come back to the Board of County Commissioners and renew those approvals, and this was one of them. And in 2006, T-Mobile did that. And then additionally, there is another cell tower out there, and that one is owned by Sprint Nextel Company. It's still in operation. And if you look at that picture on page 2 of staff memo, that's actually the nice looking conifer tree out there that you wouldn't even really recognize as a cell tower, but it's got the snow on it and the branches. And that one is owned by Sprint Nextel, and that's a 28-foot freestanding, what we call monopole cell tower, camouflaged. And then in that picture also is the brown equipment shed that serves as the ancillary building to house equipment for these 2 cell towers then. And what the applicant is requesting is to construct another cell tower on the site for AT&T. And that cell tower would also be a stealth or camouflage tower like the conifer tree you see in the picture. It's proposed to be just north of the existing facility and be 27 feet tall, so we would not increase any height out here at the cell facility. And in addition to that, the applicant's also requesting to build a 185 square foot equipment shed to house additional equipment for this tower then. As far as staff concerns, this is a constraint-free site where they've located it. This is an existing facility. There is, however, some sensitive big game ranges just north of the property. So the line for that range is approximately right here where that road goes through, a 2-track just trail. And then up here to the north of the property are the ranges. And in previous BOCC approvals, we've restricted construction for these cell towers and access to the cell towers for a certain time frame. And to carry forward those conditions from previous board resolutions, we propose that in the draft resolution that no development of the new tower or access to the cell facility should occur between December 1st and March 31st. So that's one thing I just wanted to point out. But in all, staff is recommending approval of the request, and we have a draft resolution for your review.
Questions of staff? Rachel?
And obviously, this has the permission of the current property owner and their residents. Just roughly for the record, what is the distance between this tower and any of the other adjoining properties' residents?
Oh, from other residences?
Yeah.
I won't be able to give you a distance, Rachel, but I can tell you that from the Ives residence, this is about 250 feet right here. So if we extrapolated and went to this residence,
This is 300 feet.
yep, there you go. There's a scale right there. I would think it'd be over.
600 feet?
That's a ways away.
And we've not heard any letters or concerns from the neighbors?
We have not, no.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff?
Well, I'll just throw the question out, and maybe the applicant can respond if it's more appropriate. But this tower is specifically going to be used by AT&T, and I just wonder, as we're trying to identify tower sites to better expand our cellular use throughout the county, why would we restrict an approval for a tower for only one provider? Why wouldn't we make sure that it's going to be available for other providers to really be able to accomplish what our goals are?
Good question. What you're referring to is called co-location. And in our land use code, there is a requirement that when a tower is built, it be built such that it can be co-located on. And that's a requirement in the code, and the applicant has responded to that, saying that they are willing to construct this tower for co-location, so that in the future, if there was another provider that wanted to go out there, they could also put antennas on that tower then.
So then would they have to expand that tower to accommodate either height or width?
You could either go below the oh, sorry.
Yeah.
We could just hold that for a question.
Yeah, maybe put that all into your presentation.
Okay.
Are there more questions of staff at this time? And now you can go right into your presentation. Just state your name for the record.
My name's Tom Alexander. I'm representing AT&T on this project. As far as, the land use code, AT&T is complying with everything with the land use code, including the co-location. If this tower, you could be adding on top of it. If the new carrier needed to be higher, and if the new carrier needed to be lower, they could go below our existing antennas. So it is co-locatable, and we will follow all the land use regulations.
Let me just follow up on that. So if we're approving a tower with a certain height now, so if another provider wishes to utilize that as well, but they determine that they need to go up higher, then it would have to come back to us again for an approval. And is there a co-leasing with AT&T to do that? I don't understand how that process would work.
Yeah. I can speak to the county side of it. To increase the cell facility with another provider and to increase the height of this tower, if that was an option, we would come back to the board and you would be able to review that. As far as the lease contracts with another provider, we'd have to ask. That's a tough question.
Yes, and so another provider would come in and lease space from us on the tower.
But George, in the future, you guys could, if you put any limitations in terms of time frame on this, you could require that AT&T consider co-leases in co-location with another provider in the future.
Okay, but what I'm hearing is that they've already said that that's part of this resolution or application?
It's part of the land use code. The resolution doesn't limit it to just AT&T at this point.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the reasons, just so you understand, that we didn't want to, if the code said 40 feet or 45 feet of a max, the reason we're not here asking you to blow this thing up is, we want it to look as aesthetically pleasing to everyone. I mean, this the landowner, the neighbors, you can't find this thing because of how the low we kept it and how nice it looks. And that's one of the reasons why we did come in here at 40 feet and put our antennas at 26 feet and say, you know, heck, we're gonna throw someone else on top. This way, they can add on top of it, you know, on an as-needed basis and have to come back for your approval on the height issue. Because the height issue, once again, becomes an aesthetic. Once you're looking at this area, you don't want to go above the, you know, the parapet of all the trees, and you don't want to have this one tree sticking up out of nowhere necessarily. And so that's why we're not coming at the max that the code would allow or that we could apply, which would be 40 or 45 feet. We kept this at a bare minimum, the least impact to everyone, you know, in an area that needs our service terribly.
Additional questions, Steve?
Is there any possibility with the 3 different towers located at the same place, can the signals interfere with each other in any fashion?
They can, they won't. Each of us has an FCC license, and it's against our FCC licenses to be conflicting with the other carriers. And so that would be a big problem with the FCC. And so no, we have to get approval from the other carriers. The landowner, of course, does not want any, you know, interference. So no, we are really unable to interfere. We can interfere. We fix the problem immediately if we do, because that's an FCC issue. And the FCC license is just not something that AT&T is going to mess with someone having problems with.
Okay. And also, is there something special about the Ives property that there are already 2 cell towers there and you want to put yours there? So there must be, could you explain the advantage of being right there?
There is. There's a lack of commercial industrial space around this area. Our antennas and the other carriers' antennas shoot one down valley, one up valley, and they are able to handle the entire highway there. Both the other carriers did the exact same thing. You know, it's kind of on a bit of a bend there at Lower River Road. You pass Snowmass and you kind of drop in, and so it's a good property to hit both those areas. Not saying that the next door neighbor's property or some other property would work. It surely could, but when you're looking for properties to develop in a kind of a residential area or a non-industrial commercial area, the first thing we look at, existing place, the least amount of impact. And this fit that bill for sure. It works for what solves our problem, and it's an existing place that we don't, you know, in lieu of having a big industrial area there who may or may not let us stick a 120-foot tower up and just blast the whole area.
So how far up and down the valley would it reach? Like my AT&T, I know where the dead spots are in the valley.
And that's and
I think this will reach a lot.
I believe this will cover the Highway 82 dead spots in that area. We wouldn't be investing the money. They would not be investing the money unless it solved the problem in that area. And it's just, as you know, being an AT&T customer, it's a critical problem for you, and as well as emergency services for guests coming in. You know, it can be, you know, you want to have this working on that highway area, and so yes, it should cover that, you know, that problem in that hole that you're speaking of. AT&T and other carriers have holes all over Pickens County, but that's not what we're here to. If this is going to solve, this is just an isolated area that we're trying to solve for our program.
Tom, do you have more information you'd like to present to us? Or?
I don't. I think that staff, I mean, did a wonderful job explaining what this is. It's a great project. Like I said, low impact, existing place, landowner who's on board with the project. I don't have much to add. We're keeping it as small as we can, and that's you know, co-locatable, but we want to keep it as less impact from the view. And you just can't find this place unless you're sitting on Ray Ives' backyard in his hot tub.
So I'll ask the question on you know, this idea of keeping it as small as you can. Obviously, it's a trade-off with reaching a larger area. So what is the diminishing return that got you to this height?
What is the diminishing return?
Meaning, if you were 5 feet taller, would it be better for safety issues?
It wouldn't.
Would it be better for, you know...
5 feet tall, 40 feet taller might be better as far as shooting it out. It would, you know, it's almost overlapping.
Yeah.
And when you are an engineer, you're going, well, hey, the taller the better. And then you have a landowner who goes, hey, I sit in my hot tub and look at this thing, you know, even though it's back of my property, I don't want it sticking up.
Sure.
You know, what is our minimum that we can do to accomplish our goal? And our engineers are at, you know, 27. You know, this is where we're at, where we can accomplish our goals. As technology changes, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, other carriers, you know, they need to come back, to the county with their new technology that may need to be higher or can be lower. We don't know, but we're at the minimum we can go. We have going down to 15 feet or anything wouldn't work for this site. We are at the minimum. We're shooting right over the trees, the canopy. That's the word I was looking for earlier. The canopy. We're shooting over the canopy at 27 feet, and that's where that's the minimum we could do. And the landowner is happy with that. You know, his situation is he didn't want a big tower back there anyway. So.
Any further questions at this point?
One more question.
Yeah.
If this is a good site, I'm thinking of long-term, if the current landowner sold the land, what would be the status of your lease of the property or whatever? Does it carry over?
It would carry over
indefinitely into the future?
It carries over. Usually these are 5-year lease terms with the landowner, and they're renewable 4 or 5 times in 5-year increments after that. So they can be a 20 to 25-year contract, renewable in agreement with the landowner and the carrier. And so if the property's sold, then obviously we get notified, and you know that the new landowner can take the income. I'm sure that there's creative real estate ways for the existing landowner to keep that and sell the property. But then again, I don't know the ramifications of that. That's not really our place. But generally, it carries with, you know, if it was on the side of a commercial building and you sell your commercial building, that's a selling point for your commercial building. It's a tenant. It's a good tenant. And so it helps you sell the property in a commercial environment. This being a residential environment, I'm sure there's some creative ways that real estate agents could piece this apart, but that wouldn't really be our issue as long as our lease was intact.
Further questions? At this point, I'll open the public hearing on this item. Anybody wishing to speak on this item may do so at this time. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the board for discussion.
I would make a motion.
Make a motion.
I would move to approve the new singular wireless / ATT wireless special review for a cellular facility.
Second.
First and a second, any discussion? Seeing Steve?
I want to put an item on the table. There are members of the public who don't like all the radio waves and the microwaves and everything that are going around in the air. And it's part of our society now, but I'm just curious about what are the long-term implications of it? Not that we can change it, but maybe the distance to the house, the adjoining houses or something would be an issue in this case.
Well, yes.
You know, Steve, I may not remember this entirely correctly, but from previous hearings on these matters, it's my understanding that federally the FCC eliminated the ability of local governments to consider, quote, health effects of cellular towers in creating their codes, because there's a lot of feelings, as you said, and then there's, uncertain science at the best. And so we really are not allowed to take that into consideration. Noise, visual impacts, other things, yes, disturbance of wildlife areas. And so, I think it's a good conversation to have, but perhaps more appropriate under the next item when we're talking about the new siting regulations.
And Rachel is correct on that. It was passed, I think, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good information to know.
Interesting. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Next on our agenda is an item to be continued The GSS Properties LLC site plan takings determination to be continued to 7/23/14 requested by the applicant. So I'll accept a motion to continue that.
I'll move to continue the GSS Properties LLC site plan review to July 23rd.
Second?
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is a code amendment regarding cell towers for first reading. And Lance Clark is here
I'm going to come
to...
around so I can face you all. That'd be easier. So also, just so you know, and when you're thinking about questions while we're talking about this, we have representatives from American Tower Corporation here who have worked with staff both on these code amendments as well as on our strategic initiative generally to provide better cell and broadband coverage throughout the county. They have been a partner helping us with technical questions and as well as ultimately they hope to be a provider of towers in the county to enhance cell service. They are here. And also there's a representative of AT&T who, Victoria, is not here. She is right outside of Aspen. She is right into rockfall mitigation on I-70 and got stopped and got behind schedule and is hopeful of being here before we've concluded. And I've also had very good help from the legal counsel for AT&T, of which she is part in writing the proposed amendments. What I'll hand out, since she is not here, a letter that came from the Bush Law Firm in Washington State, which is the primary counsel for AT&T on this kind of effort, code rewriting. And Ken Lyon is the person who wrote this letter, and he is the person who has reviewed the drafts that I've put together. This is what you're seeing here today is really the third draft, and he's been involved in all of those and still has some additional suggestions which I'll go over in my presentation. And I don't think I need to belabor the point as to why we're doing this. Increasing the cell service and broadband service, internet service in Pitkin County has been a strategic goal of the Board of County Commissioners for a couple of years now. And we've been working on that. Phyllis has primarily been spearheading that. And you'll remember the last time we came before you with an update was in October. And at that time, Phyllis and I wrote a memo to you that kind of summarized where we were, where we wanted to go, where we thought we needed to go. And one of the key directives that came out of that work session on October 15th was for staff to go back and work on the land use code provisions related to cell towers and cell antennas. And that's what we've done, and that's what we're bringing to you today. And what I've presented to you with my memo, I think what I would like to do is just go through what I've referred to as Attachment A, which is the redraft of the code provision related to cell towers, and try to explain to you the things that have been changed, why they've been changed, and also the things that the industry would like us to consider changing more of, which I have not done yet, because I think it requires some policy discussion. And at the very back, my attachment 3, which was my attempt to do a underline and strike out,
I think you'll find that more confusing than enlightening, and I recommend that we don't look at that. It just didn't work too well for me. But I will go through the code line for line. The most important things that we have done is deal with the height and the location. And that was pointed out by the industry as one of the key limiting factors. Though you just approved a 27-foot tower, which will appear to take care of a certain range of need for one carrier, I think it's been made clear to us in talking to the industry that in the long run there probably aren't enough sites that are going to serve all of the carrier's needs and all of the county's needs with very small towers, with under 40-foot towers, that probably there needs to be some provision to consider higher towers. And that's one of the things we talked about October 15th. And Steve, you'll remember particularly you said, well, I know of places where a 100-foot tower would not really be noticeable by anyone because of its distance from any road. And there may be other strategic locations where a 60-foot or an 80-foot tower could perhaps be found to fit in with the locale, and that's something that needed to be considered, that it would probably be too difficult to serve all of the needs in Pitkin County with a 40-foot height limitation. So that was one of the most important things that we have dealt with that I'll get to when I go through this line by line. And the other was setback. There's currently a 200-foot setback for any cell tower from a residence. Now, that was something that was adopted in 2006. We did not have that prior to 2006. You'll remember we talked not too long ago about the cell tower that is at the Inn of Aspen site, which is actually a 40-foot tower right next to the Inn at Aspen, which has not caused any notable concern from anyone at the Inn of Aspen or anywhere else. But that was approved before we had the 200-foot setback. So there's still a lot of concern about, that you brought up, Steve, about closeness to towers and if there may be any kind of negative effects. So in talking about the 200-foot setback, what we talked about with the P&Z that they suggested, what P&Z suggested was that we maintain a 200-foot setback except for the case where a tower would be located on the same parcel with a residence, under the same owner as a residence. For instance, though in the case we just saw where Ray Ives, his house is more than 200 feet from where the tower is, since he is the owner of the site and he is doing the lease to AT&T, if it were okay with him as the owner that it be within 100 feet of the house, we think that could be appropriate. So that's how we've dealt with that. And those are two big policy issues that I'll go over now. If you actually look, I don't know what page, I think it's on your scanned page 6 is where I start with the ordinance. And then scan page 8 is Exhibit A. And what you're looking at in Exhibit A is the table of permitted uses. And about 2/3 of the way down, cellular telephone facility as a principal use. You notice that's crossed out and underlined, new definition, wireless communication facility. The industry has indicated that our use of cellular telephone facility is outdated, no longer the correct term, and the term that we should use for these kinds of uses is wireless communication facility, and I have added that. And as you look at the row as you go across, this is from the land use code where S means special review, M means a master plan use, and if a column is blank, that means that the use is prohibited. So currently, cell towers, now called wireless communication facilities, essentially are a special review use approved by the Board of County Commissioners in most of the rural zone districts. Notably, they are not allowed in the rural remote zone district. That's simply prohibited, can't be approved, and in the LIR 35 zone district, which is one of our larger conservation zone districts. Also, they are not currently allowed in the urban suburban residential districts, meaning the small lot residential districts, the R6, the R15, the R30, the affordable housing zone district, the mobile home park zone district. They're not allowed at all. And that was a decision we made in 2006. And we can come back to this, but this is one of the points where in the letter that I just handed out to you from Ken Lyon, the industry would prefer that as long as it's a special review use and the board has discretion, they would prefer that it be a special review use everywhere and that there not be any prohibited zone districts. Just want to put that on the table for discussion. The same thing on the second page of the zone allowed permitted uses, which is on your scan, page 9. We have building-mounted cellular telephone antenna. Again, an outdated term, which it's proposed it be changed to building-mounted wireless communication antenna. And as an example of that, you'll remember, I believe it was just your last meeting, you approved by special review additional antenna on the animal hospital in the Aspen Area Business Center. And that is what building-mounted wireless communication antenna referred to. And we have allowed that in more zone districts in the urban area, but still not in every zone district. And again, the industry is suggesting that we allow building-mounted antenna throughout the county in any zone district. I just want to point that out. Then going to the code requirements. 43040G, wireless communication facility. This is the new term for cellular telephone facility. And I think I would like to point out, rightly or wrongly, but I think it's worked for us, our cell standards are 2 pages. Probably the most concise, succinct regulations of cell towers anywhere in the country. Hopefully it continues to work for us, but that is the way that we have done it. So we've changed the definition, the new name, and then if you look at point 3, I'll explain to you the changes that have been proposed there. A freestanding tower shall not be located within 200 feet of an existing residence or school. We added school. Before that just said existing residence. But the new addition is, except for a residence or school under the same ownership as the parcel containing the tower, such as the Ives example where we just saw, or a residence or school where the owner has given consent to location of the tower. The industry wanted to have the option, if it was impossible to locate a tower more than 200 feet from an adjoining residence, they wanted the ability to try to get the consent of the owner of an adjoining residence. And the Planning and Zoning Commission agreed with that and suggested we add that. So that is an addition.
Rob, can I?
Yes.
Lance, how come a government institution or a public institution isn't in there? Why only schools?
It could be added. The only reason for the school was thinking of the congregation of people.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that if you had a public institution or, say, a fire department or something like that, and they wanted to put wireless communication on top of or near their facility, then it should be considered.
Well, which it could. This is the prohibition, that you would have to be 200 feet
Okay.
from a residence or school. If you were a fire station, that wouldn't apply to you.
Okay,
Or, for instance, a hospital, which actually has antenna on it.
okay.
I think the most meaningful paragraph from the change standpoint is the next paragraph, and I'll explain what we did there. Any freestanding towers may be approved by the BOCC through special review procedures. We all know what the special review procedures are. It's a long list dealing with neighborhood impacts, visual impacts, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to the special review criteria, the board shall consider the extent to which a proposed tower fills unmet coverage, capacity, or technology needs. In other words, you will be looking not only at the standard neighborhood impact conditions, but also, is the tower really needed, and does it fill a technology need or a coverage need? The number of carriers that are confirmed to be located or may be located on the tower, meaning that another criterion that you would look at would be, is this thing really built for co-location? Whereas the one you were just looking at could be modified to co-locate, but really is not built for co-location today. And number 3, the documented need for the proposed height based on these factors, as well as 4, any concealment, camouflage, or screening technique proposed for the tower. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 are new criteria that you would look at. But the primary change here is this used to say no freestanding tower can exceed 40 feet, and now there is not a height limit at all. It would become totally discretionary with the Board of County Commissioners based on these new standards. The industry has suggested that in addition to this, they would also prefer that there be a certain height under which tower could be approved administratively. In other words, a 27-foot tower that you just saw would not require going to the Board of County Commissioners. It would be subject to administrative review by staff. I have not made that change. It is my feeling that at least for a period of time, the Board of County Commissioners would want to see and should see all proposed cell towers. But that is another suggestion of the industry. The next change in paragraph 5, setback. All towers shall be set back from all property lines at least a distance equal to the height of the proposed tower or the required yard setback. And this is, we're just talking setbacks like we have in every zone district. This used to say that setback from property lines would have to be 2 times the height of the tower. The industry suggested that a setback equal to the height of the proposed tower or the required yard setback, whichever is greater, would be more appropriate. And I did make that change. Under general development standards, that paragraph 1 used to read, the exterior appearance of all towers, associated support structures and buildings shall be compatible with other buildings in the natural environment. And the industry suggested that we add the preamble to that, to the extent feasible. It was felt that an absolute statement about compatibility and natural environment would be too difficult to meet. So that was a change that I did make that was proposed. On the next page, your scan page 11, buffering and screening, this is the same as it is today. However, I noticed I left out some words in paragraph 2 where it says the board may require all be appropriately screened. It should say the board may require all towers and antenna and ancillary equipment be appropriately screened, provided that such screening will not interfere, et cetera, et cetera. And that was something that didn't get in there.
So you're recommending inserting that in today's...
Yes, all towers, antenna, and ancillary equipment. The paragraph 4, that is in the current code, radio, television, and other electromagnetic transmission or reception or other properties shall not be on other properties shall not be disturbed or diminished. That was something that was just brought up today. And the industry has suggested that we take that out. Their reasoning, and they can speak to that later, but their reasoning is that that's really not a zoning enforcement or a county enforcement kind of thing. For one thing, we don't really have the skills or the technology abilities to determine what other or whether any other electromagnetic transmissions have been disturbed or diminished, and their feeling is that that's covered by the FCC, and their preference is that that come out. I left it in there for discussion.
So,
You did.
so I don't understand, if it's covered, how is it covered by the FCC if, when someone applies for?
I'll think you'll have to direct that question to someone who can answer it, and I can't.
Okay.
Rachel?
Yeah, two things. One is that if there is FCC language, then perhaps we should insert the FCC language. But I think that it would be very important that, you know, if you're half a mile away from the new facility or 600 feet, and suddenly you don't get the TV service that you're paying for, or the county translator system or something like that, that you have some sort of recourse. And that, so, you know, I would consider looking at the FCC language, but if we're not able to regulate it here locally on the ground, how is a regular citizen going to get the FCC out of DC to come address their own little problem? So I think we probably will need some sort of leverage or some sort of language in here. And then the second, I think that belongs somewhere, probably in the buffering and screening, but maybe somewhere else. I just haven't seen anything about required to maintain the screening, the buffering, the branches on the artificial tree. You know, we really ran into that problem at the W/J site, where the noise from the fan was over the noise limits because it wasn't well maintained. All the branches had fallen off the tree, you know, things like that. And so we need something in here about continuing to maintain the standards of the approval and the facility. You know, I'll let you finish wordsmithing it from there, but to the original
Actually,
approved standards.
2 places, and we should have that in every resolution of approval also.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
2 places there. The next paragraph 7, existing towers and base stations. This is a new paragraph that the industry has suggested based on federal regulations. There are some federal regulations about co-location, upgrading, replacement, modifications of existing equipment that limit the county's ability to review those as if they were new. And again, if we have more detailed questions, we have experts here who can answer it. But I have the federal legislation, and it talks about actions that do not substantially change physical dimensions of the tower or base station. And substantially change is not really very well defined in those federal regulations. But the suggested paragraph is requests for co-location, removal, or replacement of transmission equipment on existing wireless communication tower or base station may be approved with no additional special review, meaning would not come back here, provided the action does not substantially change the physical dimensions of the tower or base station as determined by the Community Development Director pursuant to applicable federal regulations. Now, we do that already just by virtue of if something fits within the code, we always allow replacement in kind. And if there are existing legal nonconformities, those can always be changed in kind. For instance, there is an AT&T tower at the top of Williams Hill, which was over height. It's 65 or 70 feet tall. and they have come in for a replacement in kind because it's old and decrepit and needs to be replaced. And that's something that staff does routinely as a replacement of existing legal non-conforming structure. This is slightly more than that, and again, this is a paragraph suggested by the industry. Perhaps the attorney's office would want to look at closer that federal regulation about substantially changing the physical dimensions and see if I have written that correctly, but that's something we can talk about.
So for example, when we had the upgrade on the crown, would that be considered a substantial change?
That was pretty significant. Yeah, there was a new building built that was much bigger. There were towers added, and that did go through your review.
So any additional towers or any increased size of a facility may fall under the criteria of a substantial change?
Well, there hasn't been any bright line interpretation that I've seen on it. I know other counties have interpreted it to allow additional height. So for example, I know Uray County, there was an 80-foot tall tower, and they approved, the county did not take a position on an additional 20 feet above that because they thought that was not a substantial change to the facility, and so they thought they could not take any position on that. So that's additional height, but that's how that county has interpreted it. There's really no bright line from what I've seen.
Right, so it becomes very subjective based on the county's codes and values in terms of how they approach land use.
Yes, I think so.
So,
and of course, we're pretty conservative. Staff is on this kind of thing, and would not be comfortable. The example Laura gave would not be something that we would do in this county. But so that is something we can have some more discussion about. And then under outside experts and disputes, those paragraphs were already there. The only thing the industry suggested was about in the middle of that paragraph. It talks about selection of expert to review the proposal should be at the sole discretion of the decision-making body. That's the way it reads today. They suggested that be the community development director, not the Board of County Commissioners, which is the decision-making body. I did not make that change. I kept that with the BOCC. The other thing is that they suggested that we add the expert selected must be a qualified radio frequency engineer with general knowledge of wireless development and the design and placement of wireless communication facilities, and I thought that made sense to add that, and I did add that. That's freestanding towers. The other section of the code that deals with building-mounted antenna, the industry suggested, as I said earlier, that we allow building-mounted antenna by special review in any zone district. I did not make that change. I left it as permitted by Section 4-20, which is the permitted use section. And again, that's something we could talk about. And then the only other code sections that are proposed to be changed are the definition section, where we would eliminate the outdated cellular telephone facility and replace it with wireless communication facility, and a more updated suggested definitions. So those are the changes. The biggest, in my mind, policy questions are obviously the height, where we had a 40-foot height limit, and now we're saying that height limit is discretionary to the Board of County Commissioners through special review, with some additional criteria about filling unmet needs, co-location, the documented need for the height in order to meet needs, as well as what camouflage techniques might be proposed. I think in my presentation, I went over the items that were pointed out by Ken Lyons in his letter of things that the industry would still suggest. And as I said, we have representatives from American Tower Corporation here, and Victoria. And Victoria, who is a counsel for AT&T, who we've worked with, are here if you have questions beyond what I can answer.
Rachel?
Thanks. I appreciate the work you've been putting into this, Lance. It's complex, and it's not just our desires, it's federal desires, and what works for the residents and the business. I guess the question I was starting to look at is on the freestanding tower. It shall not be located within 200 feet of an existing residence. And that just kind of brings up the question to me of, well, if you had an undeveloped lot and it's one of the ones that's going to be constrained, there's only a very small building site that really would be approved by our comm dev department on that property. Is there any way that we could ensure that that property's value is not diminished because there's no existing residence, but the only buildable site is going to be within 100 feet of this tower? And so we might need a further subparagraph related to undeveloped lots, undeveloped adjoining properties, so that we could take a look at that.
Yeah, it's almost, the potential activity envelope for the neighboring property, because they're going to want to build where they want to build within that activity envelope. And they not necessarily might be restricted by this, but might be it might
diminish their
property
values.
value. Yeah.
It might diminish the value. So I realize it's going to take a little more time, to think that through. But I think there may be worth, and I think it would be in relatively rare cases, but it could mean that the property owner who has agreed to the tower simply needs to shift it over by another 50 feet or something, so it doesn't impact what would be the potential only building site on a constrained lot. So that was just one concern I had. And then I'm just wondering whether we need to reiterate the 200 feet also under number 5, the setbacks. I realize that someone would have to comply with both sections of that code, but it might be worth restating it that all towers shall be set back from all property lines at least a distance equal to the height of the proposed tower or the required side yard setback, whichever is greater, and 200 feet distance from a neighboring home property.
Or refer to that paragraph.
Refer to it, yeah. So those are my comments for now.
Anybody else?
Just to clarify, because you went through a lot of information, thanks, Lance. But the essence of this is what you're proposing is that setbacks and height of towers and also are open based on special review, and that the current land use zoning codes stay intact in terms of where they're currently prohibited or where they're allowable through a special review.
Yeah, correct. Though it was suggested that we more liberalize the locations, I didn't make any changes in locations, but I did in height.
In the height, yes. Okay, thanks.
Rachel?
Just to follow up on that, and remind me of one other thing. When we get to this on second reading, and I don't know to what extent some of the information might be proprietary to our efforts on broadband or not, but I'd like to know before we pass this, are there areas where we are seeking broadband coverage in the future that there really will not be any locations unless we're able to look at a suitable spot on rural and remote or even within Forest Service areas adjacent. And, should we set up some criteria for a special review in those areas, such as, A, there's no other sites that would deliver this service to these residents in these areas, would be one. I don't know what the others are, that, they would be similar timing restrictions on servicing or construction related to the habitat, the wildlife needs. There might be visual screening, additional, requirements in that sort of area. But I think that we need a lot of consideration of this between first reading and second reading as to whether we allow special review for areas where that's the only place a siting is going to get coverage to some of the valleys that we've been trying to get coverage to.
So just to follow up with Rachel's comments, which I agree on, but this, like any of our ordinances and resolutions, are always sort of a work in progress. But it would be good to have, and I think Phyllis, you've done a lot of work in terms of starting with American Tower, in terms of starting to identify possible tower sites. And perhaps we could see that on a map and see how they fit within the different zones would be beneficial.
Yeah, again, to the extent it's not proprietary or to our own processes in any way, I don't know how that exactly meshes with a public hearing.
Yeah, well, it's
I'll let
clear.
the lawyers deal with that.
You know, it's clear and not proprietary at all that there are some Forest Service sites that are very would be very helpful, and they will be difficult. And from a Forest Service standpoint, and the EIS standpoint, and visual standpoint, as well as our own zoning that you brought up.
I mean, I could see things, again, criteria, preferred sites would have existing access, that they wouldn't be requiring new road cuts or service roads.
But
George?
But do we really have any say or purview over public lands? I mean, they have their own process they have to go through, but what's the county's role in that?
No.
I always let the attorney's office answer that.
Say no.
No.
We have no.
I mean,
Right, so they'll go through their own process. If it's deemed appropriate, then it's fine. If it's not,
yeah, we can comment on behalf of the commissioners.
Yes.
Well, I was thinking more of in holdings and private properties that are surrounded by Forest Service lands.
If I'm, just so that I understand what you're saying, I mean, perhaps there's private property in rural remote that is accessible already and wouldn't require a new road cut and wouldn't be too visible, that shouldn't be taken out of consideration. Is that?
That's kind of what I'm
That's kind
getting
of what
to.
you're saying.
That we could have a special review and set up some very stringent requirements for, but I'd rather do that than pass a code having those closed off.
I have a question, and it's not really kind of to propose any sort of change, but it's just kind of an out of curiosity. The built for co-location aspect of things, to get another carrier to locate their equipment on it, there's the nice aspect of putting it in our land use code, saying that they need to build the availability for that. What's the reality of them saying, I don't want my competitor on this tower, we're going to build it, you can put it there, but it's going to be $10 million or whatever.
Yeah. Well, when we're dealing with individual applications like the previous one, AT&T, I have always seen that as a problem, because we have never said, not only do you have to agree to co-locate, you have to agree to co-locate for a reasonable cost, or we've never tried to put those standards on. The American Tower Corporation, that are filling the back of the room, they build towers, they don't provide cell service. So their goal is to get as many carriers on a tower as possible. So to the extent that they come forward with applications, you can pretty much be assured that they will include more than one carrier. And again, if you want to ask
I mean, I don't think that there's really much that we can do to hold them to that standard, but the purpose of having that clause in here is to make sure that we don't have three properties that are right next to each other, one with Verizon, one with AT&T, and one with Singular, because that's a much bigger visual impact than them working together and having one. And I don't, I'm in a quandary because I don't know how to accomplish that in our land use code. And then saying that they have to allow for another use.
Well, that's where the difference is between whether it's AT&T owning the tower or American Tower owning the tower. Because AT&T might want to shut competitors out,
Yeah.
but American Tower wants to maximize their investment.
And we just saw an application with
That was
AT&T.
AT&T solely, yeah.
And they did have additional space. Will they ever have Verizon on that tower?
I don't know.
You know?
It gives you guys some discretion, though, with the companies coming in, knowing that you have some ability to suggest that and not approve additional towers.
Yeah.
That they may have some incentive to co-locate here. If Verizon can get a tower over here and AT&T can co-locate on that, and they know
Yeah.
that the BOCC won't approve
Yeah.
an additional tower right next to another carrier's tower somewhere else.
I mean, that's really the ultimate collaboration that we're trying to look for and find a way for. And Rachel?
I really appreciate you raising that point, because I don't know of a specific mechanism, but it does make me wonder whether we should differentiate in the code at some level between companies that are providing towers for lease that they will continue to own, who obviously are open to the competition, versus towers that are by a given provider and are solely owned by them. And perhaps on the towers that are solely owned by a single provider, on a new application, we would request that they give us some sort of master plan of where their other service areas are, or even if it's a preliminary plan, so that we can look to see are those the opportunities. Yes, you're coming in for this tower today, but we know you're going to want 2 more, and kind of try to funnel that cooperation into a unified plan throughout the county. But you know, I just don't know. But there may be additional requirements that we could set up as incentives and disincentives for those providers who own their own towers to make sure the co-location really occurs. I don't know. I just like our staff to think about that before it comes back.
Yeah, and I would just comment that I think this is an industry that can be difficult to understand, because I know the individual carriers are building towers and leasing them, just like an American Towers is building towers and leasing them. And perhaps, you know, as a follow-up, you know, these code amendments remove some of the barriers that we've seen to the co-location and such. It is perhaps the case that as we get closer to having a master plan identified and such, what we need to look at is, are there other incentives to shorten the time frame to getting, like I think you said, Rachel, you know, the ability for a company whose main purpose is to lease to multiple carriers the quickest path possible to develop in those areas at levels that we think are appropriate. What we've never had on the table before is an understanding of where that infrastructure needs to go, what size that infrastructure is going to be, and what the impacts would be from a visual, aesthetic, you know, all the concerns that we have. It may be to, you know, take a next step after this to look at what if we could do a pre-approval process or something that, you know, if we already know those sites, so we can shorten that path. Those are types of things where I think we can incentivize and move forward. This is an important, we think the types of changes that we're recommending here are an important step in the right direction, but there may be another step after this to provide the kind of incentives that you guys are talking about.
Rachel?
Yeah, that's a good idea, John. I mean, I could see something where if someone comes in, even if they're private providers, but they already have a contract with a second provider, and it comes into us as a joint project, it's more expedited than one that's not. That it's just saying we have an opening for them later someday. But if they come in the beginning as a two-party project, that might receive some different preferential treatment. The other thing I'm wondering that might complete this question for us a little bit more is to do a survey of our existing tower sites that are owned by private companies to say how many actually do have any co-location on them. You know, I don't know if there are or aren't, but it seems that our companies who are operating in our county should be able to provide that information. Are there any towers that co-location has actually really occurred on?
Yeah, and we can try and collect that information. One thing I'd caution the board on is that I do believe that our 40-foot height limitation that we've had in place has precluded co-location in it.
Yeah, I think that though we have always said in all our approvals that co-location is desirable and required, I don't think that there are any. If there are, it's one or two, because all of them are in this 27, 30, 40-foot range, and it's difficult. For instance, the AT&T tower that we just approved, T-Mobile's right next door,
Yeah.
and another 27-foot, and Judy Royer is just down valley and has two other carriers there behind her house. Now, the good thing about that is hardly anybody knows that their cell service is coming behind Judy Royer's and Ray Ives' house when they're going up and down the canyon. But there's not co-location. There's several towers.
Maybe it's a broader definition of co-location. Maybe two towers on one site isn't as bad as folks might think, as opposed to taller towers.
Further questions at this point? We have a second reading on this.
This is not the public hearing. The public hearing is the second reading. The industry people were interested in being here regardless, because I told them that a lot of the important stuff gets said at the first reading, even though it's not a public hearing.
Well, I'm going to wait for public comment for the second hearing, but I would encourage any of the people in the audience that if they wanted to get information from what they heard to Lance or to the commissioners, they can always do so via our emails.
A letter for the record?
Or letters for the record for the second hearing if they can't make the travel the next time. Lance?
Yeah, the one issue where the industry made recommendations, and I told you the ones that I incorporated and the ones I did not, and we talked about a lot of them. One we did not talk about was the potential for certain benign facilities to be approved by staff rather than the BOCC. And I would that's pretty important in terms of drafting, if we go in that direction as opposed to the way I've drafted it, which is that they all come to the board. So I would appreciate any input you have.
That was regarding like a lower height limit that a staff could have an approval for.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
kind
it
of
could
what
be,
John was talking about, a phase two. Maybe we get to that point.
Yeah. I think
later.
that I would recommend that we put that in our phase two for further discussion, and see how applications come in, for these new things. Steve?
Lance, could we get a map of the county showing the existing locations of wireless communication towers and what their heights are? And then also include on the map the proposed, or kind of the general proposed locations where, the new towers that are proposed for completing the system in the county, as much as that's been developed so far.
Yeah, that would be more problematic.
Yeah, but I know, I was thinking that same issue, Rachel, about the rural and remote land, or, to complete service to some parts of the county, we might need to go into places that don't have the appropriate zoning according to what we're doing, or what we're wanting to do with expanding the service to different parts of the county.
We could attempt that, the map.
But
of
if we have the
towers.
existing towers, that could give us a kind of a visual of what's out there right now.
So Lance, before I accept the motion, some of the other things that we talked about was some sort of code language to maintain the look and structure of the material of the tower facilities, whatever it is. If a branch falls off, that they replace it. And then the neighboring property issue, which I think is going to take a little bit more thought process as to how to exactly word that. But I had that written down before Rachel brought it up, and I think that's crucial, that if a tower gets built and the neighboring property hasn't built, but they're able to build within that certain area. So I think that should be added somewhere. And then you had the two additions of the tower, antenna, and auxiliary equipment
Right.
in the one section that wasn't in the amendment that's before us. Were there any other changes that I missed that would be included in this
I don't think.
first reading?
So.
Any other thoughts? I'll accept the motion towards that if there's somebody out there.
I would move to approve the code amendment for cell towers as amended on first reading.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Lance. Good work.
And Phyllis.
And Phil and everybody who had a part in it. And our cellular provider partners out there.
Thank you.
Thanks for keeping our county safe and everything. Next on our agenda is open discussion. John, do we have anything for open discussion?
Today.
Any commissioners have? Michael?
An issue that happened, if you remember, you guys approved the Aspen Rental new location on Highway 82, just outside of Basalt. Well, they've moved in to there, but they have a truck, a large truck, with sides that are approximately 10 by 12 or something like that. And they have Aspen Rental written on the side of the truck. And they parked the truck adjacent to the highway.
I noticed that.
And that to me is a violation of our sign code. And I would like that truck and any kind of truck having advertising on it for that facility moved. There's quite a bit of property there, moved out of sight. So I bring that up for your consideration.
I would support that.
Yeah. And maybe our sign code should be potentially looked at to reinforce that.
It may already cover
Yeah.
that, but regardless, that we had some understandings.
I wasn't at that hearing, so.
That truck looks about the size of a billboard, and it reminds me of when Bugsy Barnard and his partners in crime were cutting down billboards down in that part. That same part of the county was where some of the signs were cut down years ago, so I would concur with what Michael's brought up.
Edward Abbey would be ashamed. Rachel?
Yeah, I have two items. One is that as we go forward with these Bureau of Land Management public comment period, I think we should very formally request that the city of Aspen make comments as well. It just might not be on their radar screen, and they have stood in the past in solidarity with us on the Thompson Divide issues, and it's just a very short time frame for those public comments. So I'd like to make sure we give them the heads up and formally request that they submit some comments as well. The other is, pardon me, a little bit of a longer issue to talk to the board about, but our State Senator Gail Schwartz has had Senate Bill 23 in the works for a period of time now, and it's the agricultural efficiencies for conservation for healthy streams purposes. The essence of the bill is that if a irrigator, agriculturalist decides to expend the money to put in conservation efficiency measures on their property and can save a certain amount of the non-consumable water that they currently use to push the water to the end of the irrigation ditch or the laterals, or if they put in more efficient sprinkler system, that the non-consumed water can be left in the river from the point of the historic diversion to the point of the historic return flows. and it would become a water right that had to be accepted by the CWCB to support existing minimum stream flows on a river. It's really been generated from Picken County in many ways because of the problems on the Crystal and the kind of rough working group that's been down there with some of those irrigators to say, you know, how can we save the Crystal, and yet if they just cut back and do irrigation efficiencies now, there's nothing to prevent someone else from taking the water. Gail had a bill last year that tried to deal with this that got somewhat eviscerated in that area. It did advance water conservation in other areas, and so that was Senate Bill 19. And so it's come back this year as Senate Bill 23. And Gail spent an awful lot of time, and her staff and others in the environmental community, working with a great many people to find something that would be acceptable. And so it again has been watered down. It's limited to West Slope river districts. It doesn't allow stacking, so you can't improve a river beyond minimum stream flows, things like that. So she's modified it several times to satisfy the interest of Northern Water and Water Congress and everything. It did receive Water Congress vote and support of approval. A lot of abstentions of people who didn't think that it mattered because it wasn't in their district. But yet, at the end of the day, there have been reservations expressed before committee at the legislature from the Farm Bureau, and then at the end of the day, the River District, while they had been monitoring it for quite a period of time and trying to modify it, eventually took a vote to oppose. And I'm not sure I could fully express the concerns of some of their members who dominated that discussion. Some had to do with, well, why don't we use these water efficiency savings for sales to municipal providers? And now it's going to uneven the playing field that the cost to someone for a municipal provider to buy ag efficiency water is going to be too expensive. At any rate, I have testified on the bill twice, once before the Senate and now once, Steve did as well at that time, and then once before the House. It's kind of really struggling in the House committee and to move it onto the full floor of the House. I just had received an email from the QQ staff that they think there is a new amendment that would satisfy the River District, and they're going to try and present it to the River District, I believe, at their board meeting next week. And so I would like to ask the board if we could ask the Attorney's Office to draft a letter of support for Senate Bill 23 that we could formally submit to the River District for their hearing, as well as to the House committee that will be taking a look at this. I actually met with the River District on Monday of this week on behalf of QQ, and we were talking about the larger state water plan and how QQ and the River District can, allocate resources to have a good effect on the state water plan. And I kind of turned back to them at some point and said, this is an interesting process because we're supposed to develop all of our non-consumptive needs, and then we're supposed to develop processes to solve those non-consumptive needs. And here it was a tool to do that in our area, and then the River District opposes it. And so, that's going to happen, and people have different elements they need to see worked into a proposal. But I think it really kind of highlighted to at least the staff there, it wasn't the board membership, that, it's a bit of a conundrum to ask us to find water to solve our shortages on streams that are totally dewatered, but then to oppose some of the only tools and the only places where water could come from. And so I think there's a shot that we could get their neutrality position, and if that's the case, then we can move the bill out of committee into the House floor. So I'd just like to see if the board would support a letter.
I support that. I have a question, though. Does the 1177 have an option or opportunity to weigh in, or have they weighed in? Have they discussed it? Because it's the 1177 is supposed to be set up to look at these issues, but it's being facilitated by the River District.
Well, it's not really being facilitated by the River District. The River District has very generously allocated the staff time of Jim Pocrant to it, and he has been nominated and elected chair repeatedly by the group because it's so many citizens and volunteers. I think that it's a little bit of something where we've had a lot of new players join the roundtable recently because of the state water plan coming forward, who haven't had the history on a lot of these issues. And there's just has been a little bit of fear of the unknown related to that. And so we haven't asked any of the 1177s, and it was Senator Schwartz's direction, that they were not asking. Now, the amendment, as I read it from Tory, here we go. The amendment would make Senate Bill 23 a 5-year study that would restrict projects to only 12 total projects with a maximum of 3 projects in each basin. Any efficiency savings projects would continue past the 5-year period, but the program would automatically sunset after 5 years. After 5 years, the Colorado Water Conservation Board would issue a report to the legislature on the process of approving, decreeing, and implementing the ag efficiency measures. So it's really getting pulled down enough to be acceptable, to be a pilot, literally, and I think that would make a difference. In some ways, George, where people are voting, it comes from where their constituencies are.
I would like to see the amendment. I know John has had some hesitancies on this particular bill, which I'm sure he's discussed with you, and how the amendment relates to those particular concerns, particularly the perhaps chance to lose water rights if you can't come back from the efficiencies.
Yeah, and I know some attorneys have difference of opinions on that. It's just there's been a tremendous amount of work been done with the Nature Conservancy, and actually the Colorado Cattlemen's Association are supporting it. And I was really kind of quite impressed with the number and the breadth of the supporters last time, but I was also kind of shocked to hear Greeley come out opposed to it, and Aurora, even though it doesn't work in their basins at all, and it's not even applying to their basins, but they're concerned that if it started over here, those ag efficiencies might spread to their part of the state. And that concern really has more to do with people wanting to make sure all the water goes into long-term municipal use instead of anything into the rivers. So I agree totally, and if it becomes something that John is not comfortable with, we might have that opportunity to discuss it again next Tuesday at our work session, as opposed to, because then I think its River District meeting starts on Wednesday, the 16th, and so maybe it's something we end up silent, or maybe it doesn't go anywhere. But it's nice to know that the River District has been trying to find a way to allow a pilot project to go forward.
Steve?
Rachel, is the bill still in the House Ag Committee?
They laid it over. They took testimony. They did not take a vote. They laid it over, and so they're kind of waiting to see if there was any amendments that could make it more acceptable to folks.
Okay. I'm very supportive of this bill, and then you mentioned the Crystal River, and there are at least 2 other places in the county, on Capitol Creek and on the Roaring Fork River going through Aspen, where the bill potentially could add some water to those stretches of the rivers where they get very low and way below the minimum stream flow right now.
Okay. Well, we'll coordinate with John's office and see if there's something we can submit as a formal letter and go from there.
Any other open discussion? Our agenda said that we're adjourning to executive session. I guess that's not.
Oh, that was
when we were talking about the housing and acquisition stuff.
That's correct. We had that on as on an as-needed basis. So
I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Grassroots.